Here's another update on the cabinet. I've got the new veneer on top. I did it just like on my p5o8 491040, where I painted on several layers of diluted wood glue, let it dry, and then ironed it on and used a J roller to really make sure it was down nicely. I think it looks pretty good. It's kind of a split pattern down the middle and then mirrored on either side. It's a good match for the old veneer too. Once I sand this down, it'll be a pretty good color match, and it's very similar in grain. Now what I'm going to do to fill in the grain is use this Bellin water-based grain filler. I've used it a couple times before. It's a little messy, but it's a lot faster than using shellac like I did before on the Philco. Shellac is fine when the grain isn't that bad or that open. Like, I'll probably use it on the sides. But this raw veneer is just so rough because of all these open pores in the wood grain. So what this is it's kind of like plaster of Paris or grout. And it's got a brown tint, so it won't really stand out. You can get it in several other colors. There's also solvent-based, and the fumes can get kind of nasty, so I like this water-based stuff. So the idea is you scoop it out, spread it on like with a spatula, and actually spread it across the grain to really work it in. And once it's dry, just do a light sanding to eliminate any high spots. I'll crack this can open and show you how it goes. Here's what the grain filler looks like. It's fairly thin, soupy substance. You can see it's got pigment in there. I think it's more grayish than brown, but whatever. I already went ahead and slathered it on the top here, and now I'm working it in with an old credit card against the grain to make sure it gets done into all the wood pores. It dries pretty quick. You can see it's already dried in some areas. Once it's completely dry, I'll sand it down, and I think I'll move on to just do a sealer coat of shellac and then move on to the lacquer. My lacquer has arrived. So here's some walnut, that's the dark walnut. And perfect brown. And somewhere in here, there's a Van Dyke walnut. So I'm going to do a couple tests to see which of these looks the best. I figured it's either going to be the Van Dyke walnut or the perfect brown. This is the one that I shot a sample of on a radio that I thought looked pretty good. So I'm going to take a scrap of the new veneer, some stuff I trimmed off the top, and spray a couple samples, and hopefully one of them will look pretty good. I've sprayed that scrap with some perfect brown and some Van Dyke walnut and laid it next to the front of the cabinet, which I have not stripped yet. And as I hope, the Van Dyke walnut is a great match. It's definitely what I'm going to be going with. Mouser Electronics just arrived. I love getting these little boxes crammed full of new parts. Amazingly, this only came to about $25, and I got a lot of parts. Tons of capacitors and resistors. These are those Nichicon skinny high capacity, high voltage caps that I'm hoping I can get to fit in here. I'll pull out the exact 4 that need to go into one of these cans and just eyeball it and see if they fit. Hopefully they will. Got a bunch of power resistors too. Metal oxide, flame proof. They don't quite look like the old carbon composition resistors, but 1 and especially 2 watt carbon comp resistors are really, really hard to find. The only places I've seen them at all are for tube audio amp specialty shops, and they want sometimes several dollars for a single resistor, and I just can't spend that much money on something like this. But just close enough, I think. For a schematic, I am referring to a Wallace Telade. They come out with a whole series of these in the late 40s and in the 50s. What they would do is they would gather up schematics for a particular manufacturer, in this case General Electric, and then for a time frame, like this is 46 to 54, and bundle them all up in this big ledger-sized ring-bound format. This is kind of cool too, because it's Includes the very first color GE TV, which must have come out in '54. In particular, though, here is the 810 that I'm working on. So I've been using this for a reference, and that's how I was able to determine that some of the parts that have been replaced under here, they were replaced with the wrong values. But when I ordered from Mauser, I got all the right values. So now I'm going to pull out the four capacitors that go into this guy and into this guy, and line them up and see if I'll be able to fit them inside here. The Mauser catalog provides dimensions for capacitors, so I was pretty sure that these would fit, and indeed they will. Certainly this guy's no problem. It's only a single section cap. Fits right in there. And as for these guys, each with their 4 sections, no problem. Even if I put them all side by side like this, they'll fit. But if I needed to, I could certainly stack them vertically, because this can is quite tall. Either way, they'll definitely fit. Same with this guy. What I'm using are these Nichicon small size, high capacity, high voltage capacitor. It's the UPZ line. There's a close look at one of them. So this little guy is 33 microfarad, 450 volt, and these are rated for high temperature, up to 105 degrees Celsius. Some of the cheaper caps are only rated to 85 degrees Celsius. These sets can get pretty hot, as you can imagine, in the summer with all the tubes fired up inside the cabinet and so on. So yeah, I really like these caps. I highly recommend them, and they don't cost that much. So next order of business is to clean off my workbench and get it organized, and then I'll put this up there and start working on it. Here's an update on the cabinet. I finished sanding down the grain filler, and I've just given it a coat of clear shellac as a sealer. That leaves a few details. One, I need to paint these vent holes with some black paint, and the area around the screen needs to be painted with this pale greenish color that's flaking off. I went to the Home Improvement Center and found this Rust-Oleum satin green apple that I think is a pretty darn good match. As for the trim pieces, Battery Maker was dead on. These polish up real nice. Turns out they're solid brass, polish up very nicely, and the recessed paint is in fantastic condition and was not harmed when I polished up the brass. So, here's the logo. I still have some work to do on the screen bezel, but that will shine up very nicely. As for the control area, I did clean a portion here and it looks fantastic. I had been curious about this top section, which appears to be darker. Well, I asked around online and found somebody else who has a GE810 that's in better condition, and he says that the bottom section and this logo here were originally polished very bright, like this. But this top section was sort of a coarse polish, like with a rough grit. So what I thought was actually a coating that made it darker is just it wasn't polished as brightly. So I'll try to replicate that. I've got a couple grits of pumice stone, and I'll try to do it. If I can't, honestly, I wouldn't mind just polishing the whole thing up really shiny brass. I think it would look great. Finally, I do have some lacquer that's specially formulated for coating brass so that it doesn't corrode. I've used it before on some knobs and it worked great. Like a year later, the brass is still bright and shiny. My concern with using it on this, though, is that the lacquer may react with this red paint. So I think I'll hold off for now, but if this starts to tarnish in a few weeks, I may give that lacquer a shot. That's all for now.